Thank you very much. For me, it's a real pleasure and privilege to have this opportunity to talk to you at this conference, which, as we all know, remembers 9/11, but also looks to the future and looks to some of the new challenges that we have to deal with as we try and counter those who wish to cause us harm. Because the security challenges that face us all continue to evolve and change. Over the last few years, they have become even more cross-border in nature, something which means that we have to respond with more cooperation and international cooperation and exchange, something that lies at the very heart of your conference. As I say, it's a pleasure to be with you. We all know that terrorism is not a new challenge. It's something that's manifested itself in different ways and forms at different times in history and in different parts of the world. In Europe, we have faced a particular challenge over recent years from jihadi terrorism, a terrorism that's driven by a particular view of the world, which takes the world as its theater of operations and increasingly harnesses the power and reach of technology, including the internet, to spread its poisonous ideology. Let there be no doubt, the jihadi threat remains a very real threat in Europe. Daesh may have lost its territory and some of its sources of revenue, but it's not been eradicated, as you know well, and it continues to be active. Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and in Europe. According to Europol's threat report in 2018, there were 24 foiled, failed, or completed jihadi terrorist attacks in the European Union. The number of European foreign terrorist fighters traveling or attempting to travel to conflict zones is, as we've just heard, low, as are the numbers who are seeking to come back, but it remains a challenge. Recent attacks in the EU have largely been perpetrated by lone actors, inspired by terrorist propaganda, using unsophisticated means, homemade explosives, vehicles, which are still, as we all know, deadly. These people have mostly been radicalized online, and I shall talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but also in our prisons. And recent incidents show that they are using and are ready to use new means, including CBRN materials. So despite the fact that the issues around terrorism are a little bit less present in the headlines in Europe, now is certainly not the time for us to lower our guard. On the contrary, we need to redouble our efforts to strengthen our defenses, increase the barriers to committing terrorist atrocities, and to take the fight to those who would do us harm before they have the chance to act. Which is why the EU is seeking still to set out and strengthen a comprehensive approach to deal with these issues internally, and is committed to reaching out and strengthening its cooperation with partners internationally. We are working to close down the space in which terrorists and hostile actors can seek to do us harm, by denying them the means to attack us, be that money, munitions, movement, or manpower. We've also sought to build our resilience by strengthening our borders, and we've worked to tackle radicalization in our communities and online to try and break the cycle of indoctrination, incitement, and instruction. As I said, returning foreign terrorist fighters and their families are still a challenge for us in the EU as elsewhere. a total of some 5,500 foreign terrorist fighters left Europe to go to the conflict zone. Around 1,600 have returned. Approximately 2,500 are still either in the conflict area or currently unaccounted for. And we have a particular challenge, long-term challenge, with children who have experienced a high level of violence while in Syria and Iraq, indeed, some of whom may have been sucked into participating in that violence. At the EU level, we've sought to take a series of measures, including where necessary new legislation. We've passed legislation like a new directive on combating terrorism, which strengthened the legal framework by criminalizing acts such as receiving training for terrorism, travel for terrorist purposes, as well as organizing or facilitating such travel. We have stepped up security at our external borders so that we know who is coming in and out of our shared space. We've adopted in the EU Passenger Name Records Directive, as well as legislation setting up new information systems, such as an entry-exit system, which will record the entry and exit of all third country nationals, and an equivalent, a European equivalent of the US ESTA system, ETIAS, a pre-clearance system for non-visa third country nationals. We're building our collective resilience by improving our information systems internally, enabling faster, more systematic access to information for those who are on the front line, border guards, immigration officers, police officers, whose job it is to keep us safe. We're closing down information gaps and blind spots to make it much harder for criminals and terrorists, for example, to use false identities to evade detection. We've also made it hard for terrorists to get access to firearms and explosives with reinforced controls. Europol, our law enforcement agency, has been playing a crucial role in all of this, supporting member states. I think you heard from them yesterday. And I'm pleased to say that Europol is also playing an important role in reaching out and building cooperation with partners in third countries, including here in Israel. We need to keep building that kind of practical cooperation. We have a proposal for a series of agreements with a number of countries, including Israel, to exchange personal data with Europol in order to strengthen that cooperation. And the EU is also acting at grassroots level by providing funding to help cities and local authorities across Europe take the necessary steps to protect public spaces without changing their fundamentally open character. There are lessons here, I think, that we can all draw from partners, including Israel, who've had to tackle this problem. I'm struck when I go, for example, to Nice, a city in the south of France that suffered a terrible terrorist attack, how they have built practical cooperation with authorities here. We're also looking at, of course, new ways of delivering these threats that can be harnessed by terrorists and others who wish to cause us harm. And that includes our work on drones. We've been closely following the growing threat that they can pose to our critical infrastructure, to our public spaces. And we are putting forward various initiatives on how to make drones safer and more secure. We're holding, indeed, a high-level conference on the 17th of October on this. I'm looking forward very much to Israeli participation at that event. Prevention is, of course, better than cure. And to that end, as I say, we've been working to tackle radicalization, both on and offline. We are supporting grassroots projects aimed at spotting and countering radicalization, working with practitioners on the ground in communities through our radicalization awareness network in Europe and in our neighborhood. Indeed, we have over 3,000 experts, largely drawn from civil society, who are working on the ground to spot radicalization, to tackle it, and to drive out terrorist recruiters. Online terrorist content remains a real problem. I know you were discussing this yesterday. We have made some progress through the voluntary cooperation that we set up with the big social media platforms. And I think you were listening to Facebook yesterday. I want to salute the efforts that they and other large social media platforms have put into this. But it's still, as seen from our perspective in Europe, it's still not enough. There is still far too much of this poisonous content online. It is linked to every single one of the recent terrorist attacks in Europe, either through incitement, occasionally through instruction, and in every case through glorification. So we feel that we have to do more to try and bear down on this illegal terrorist content. And we proposed some new rules, some legislation, which once adopted, which I hope will be done by the end of this year, will see terrorist content online taken down within 1 hour when there is formal notification by the police or judicial authorities. This is a priority which we need to keep working on. We're also working with international partners to support measures aimed at tackling terrorist financing. At the EU level, we've taken various measures to enhance the fight against terrorist financing, money laundering, notably by facilitating access for law enforcement to central bank account registries. But again, we recognize that we need to go further on this. I would like to see us establish in Europe a European terrorism finance tracking system to complement and work with the system that they have in the US. I also think that we need to do more to look at how technology can be used, blockchain, virtual currencies. And here, I think, is an area where Europe and Israel can work together. Indeed, more generally, I think we need to reinforce our efforts on how to deal with the misuse of new technology. Technology brings huge benefits, we all know that, but in the wrong hands, used for the wrong purposes, it also brings new threats and challenges to the way we organize our societies and the way we live our lives. Hybrid and cyber threats are becoming more difficult to deal with. And I want to just say a word about that. There are classic cyber threats targeting systems and data. And in response to that, in Europe, we have developed a new EU cybersecurity strategy designed to build our resilience, making ourselves harder to attack, quicker to recover, but also by strengthening deterrence, increasing the chances of attackers getting caught and punished, as well as working internationally with partners. We want to continue to do that. These are challenges that face all of us, and those who are like-minded and share the same values need to work together to counter them. Again, hybrid threats have become harder to deal with. A hybrid mix of methods is, in fact, in some hands, the perfect tool for hostile actors, both state and non-state, to achieve their goals without crossing the threshold of formally declared warfare. Hybrid not only includes everything on a spectrum from cyber and cyber-enabled threats, including malicious interference in our democratic processes through the use of disinformation, but also includes means such as chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. And to combat this, we need, again, to work together effectively. The evolving chemical threat is, as you all know, not, I'm afraid, something that is a far-fetched plot in a fantasy film. It's something that's very real, as we have seen with a failed plot in Australia, as well as events in a quiet city in the south of England, Salisbury, and indeed an attempt at an attack in Cologne, in Germany. In Europe, we've reinforced our CBRN action plan, and we've developed with our member states a list of chemicals that are most prone to be misused by terrorists and others. We're reinforcing controls around that. We've improved detection capacity, launched a public-private dialogue to explore ways of better controlling access to dangerous chemicals in general. We also want to build our international partnership on these issues. We're working with NATO, the US, and indeed would like to strengthen our cooperation with you here in Israel. As well as classical cyber threats, we've been looking at cyber-enabled threats like disinformation, especially attempts to interfere in our democratic processes and debate. There was a lot of concern in Europe in the run-up to the recent European parliamentary elections that those represented a very tempting target. Here in Israel, of course, you're in the run-up to your elections as well. I hope you're focused on countering any disinformation. In Europe, what we did was put in place a series of countermeasures, such as a rapid alert system with the European member states in order to spot and tackle any coordinated disinformation campaigns. And we also successfully agreed with the big internet platforms a code of practice on disinformation. This is an international first. I believe that these measures had some effect, but there's still, I'm afraid, many reports of disinformation, even if it wasn't on a spectacular scale, during those European elections. And we certainly need to keep doing this work to try and reinforce awareness and cooperation between parliaments, political parties, politicians, civil society, and the big social media platforms in order to promote transparency and try and make it harder to spread disinformation. One of the key areas of vulnerability that we're very aware of in Europe, much in the news at the moment, is how to secure our critical digital infrastructure, the digital plumbing of our modern lives, and in particular, what to do around the security of 5G networks. This is an example where we feel we need an international approach, and in Europe, we need a European approach reflecting our European interests and values. We're not going to be able in Europe to go for a blanket ban. Our market is open as long as you respect the rules. But what we have launched is a hard-headed look at potential vulnerabilities around 5G and indeed at what we can do to manage and mitigate those risks. We're working on that together across Europe, and before the end of this year, we will produce some results, some recommendations for action, which we've said from the outset do not exclude deciding that some services, products, suppliers are unsafe. There are other challenging new risks on the horizon. AI is set to bring huge benefits. However, again, if in the wrong hands, it's also potentially a big challenge and a big risk. In Europe, we've set up a high-level expert group which has produced guidelines for the development of ethical and trustworthy AI. And we want to work with partners to try and make sure that this technology is used for the good and not misused for ill. In conclusion, I'd like once again to emphasize just how important it is to us in Europe to have a wide set of dialogues and exchanges with our international partners on terrorism and on cyber and hybrid threats. It's absolutely vital that we share our experiences at meetings like this. The problems and challenges we face from terrorism in particular are going to vary, are going to be different depending on our situation. But there are lessons that we can all learn and experiences that we can all share. And the signal we send that we stand united in our rejection of and in our determination to fight terrorism in all its forms is a powerful one, underpinned by bonds of friendship, the friendship that we have and are demonstrated at meetings like this. Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention.